David Bohm Seminar Series 1, Friday, November 11th, 1988, Oak Grove School, Ojai, California.
Well, I see a great many familiar faces here. I see a great many. Maybe you should turn it up a little. Can you turn it up? Is that better? Nope. Nope.
Keep on, I'll keep bringing it.
Okay. Is this a bit better now?
Yeah.
Right. I said I see a great many familiar faces here, and but some people who are new, and so I wanted to discuss something which is a bit different from what were discussed in the last 2 or 3 seminars we had, or perhaps 4. And there are 2 points now. One is that I should go over a bit of what we did, because some people here have not been through it, and maybe others have forgotten. Also, this material is not fully organized in my mind yet, so perhaps we will all participate together. You see, we will not, in order to clear it up, right? In order that perhaps we can have a dialogue or a discussion or whatever you want to call it. It's very hard with 50 people to have a complete exchange. I mentioned that last year, that it's simply too many, but because if everybody spoke, it would really occupy all the time. But we can have a kind of what I call a spirit of the dialogue. I say the idea is that we can listen to each other, and if we hear things which violate our notion of what is right and true and so on, we don't. The ideal would be we don't suddenly jump up and say how outrageous, but rather suspend that and look at that and look at your own view and all the views together, right? Well, I'll come back to that more later, but that's the kind of beginning, saying even though we can't actually all exchange, we can all participate in this spirit of a dialogue, right? Which means both, as we'll come to later, to partake of and to take part in, right? The word participate. So now, in the last few meetings, or whatever we want to call them, I've been discussing thought, and primarily the nature of thought, and saying it's really, in my view, behind most of the problems of the human race. Now, it may seem to some people that a thing as abstract as thought can't be behind all these problems. There's something much more vital, real or solid must be behind them. But we have discussed it, those who have been here, in great length, showing that it is, you can see that it is behind it. You know, you can make a very good case for it. We're trying to get more volume.
Just so that
people can
be picked up.
Can be picked up. Yes. Now, I'll talk a little while, and I hope that soon we will start to discuss. And because I think it's essential to have a discussion or a dialogue. A discussion is an exchange. The word discuss is based on the same root as percussion, like a ping pong ball going back and forth. And a dialogue is something more of a common participation, as we're not playing a game against each other, but with each other. So now, see, how is it that thought? See, what are the troubles of the world? Well, they seem so many that we can hardly begin even to list them. You know, we can see everywhere wars going on, starvation, torture, pillage, you know, disease, all sorts of dirty tricks played in politics, and we have 2 sides. In addition, we have a kind of polarization between East and West. There are two sets of values. You see, each one professes its own. The West professes the value of the individual and freedom, and the East professes the value of the collective society, everybody being taken care of. Right? And neither of these societies very well meets up to what they profess, but as we now know. Now, but still, they seem to be fighting over it. Now, or at least they're in a very hostile attitude, and they could fight. And then we have North and South, that polarization. You know, that North is supposed to be more wealthy and the South less, so it clearly is. There's tremendous trouble in Africa and South America and in southern parts of Asia. I mean, very great poverty and indebtedness and a breakdown of the economy and general chaos in what's going on there. Now, okay, so then we have the danger of nuclear war. It seems to have receded a bit because of Gorbachev, but nobody is sure that he's going to succeed, and perhaps not even he himself, and although he must maintain his confidence. And if he doesn't succeed, we will be back where we were, if not worse. So if he does, things will look a bit better. Right? Now, so if there's a nuclear war, that's sort of the end of our civilization, or if not the human race. Right? Now, then you have the danger of ecological destruction. You have pollution. You have destruction of agricultural land, of forests. You know, the change of climate they talk about now, and many other things. That there could be a real ecological disaster within us in not too long a period of time if people just keep on doing whatever they're doing. And well, I don't need to multiply it. You see, we have you have growth of crime and violence everywhere, drugs and so on, indicating that people are very unhappy and not satisfied, and so on. So the list could be extended forever, almost. Now, I think if you look into this, it's all thought that's behind it, you see. See, thought is somehow going wrong. See, what about nationalism? You see, or what about the East-West division or the North-South? You see, people think in a certain way. They think we have our values of the East, their values of the East are our values of the West. We think we're here in the North and we're not very responsible for the South, and the South, they're just going their own way and so on. Everybody says, I belong to this group, to this country, to this nation, to this religion, and it doesn't matter what happens to the others. In fact, if they get in my way, we'll just fight. Now, that acts as if the people are acting as if they were all independent and all rather far away from each other. And independent of each other, but in fact everybody is completely interdependent. You see, everybody depends on trade now, and if trade stops, the whole thing collapses. Every country depends on every country. Pollution crosses the boundary, radioactive clouds cross the boundaries, and everything crosses the boundaries, including ideas and violence and so on, customs, habits. But everybody's thinking as if none of this is happening, right? It seems strange why they should, because it's so obvious that it is happening. You see, if you say, why should it be? Now, it's a way of thinking, right? People seem to be committed to this way of thinking, that people don't want to look at any other way of thinking, right? That people want to believe that everything is going to be all right, you see, without being too disturbed, without changing things too much. And see, people say, well, the economy is going all right here, why should we worry? I mean, some people say it isn't so good, but still those who feel it is going right say, well, it's okay for us, why should we worry about all those people? I mean, it's all right to think about them, but we needn't worry too much about them, right? But in fact, it all depends on them. You know, if it doesn't go right there, it won't go right here, you see, and vice versa. So that's a certain way of thinking. It's fragmentation, right? It's to break things up into bits as if they were independent. Now, it's not merely making divisions, but it's breaking things up, which are really not different or not separate. It's like taking a watch, I gave you an example, and smashing it into fragments, rather than its parts are taking it apart and finding its parts, right? You see, the parts are parts of a whole, but the fragments are just arbitrarily broken off from each other. And things that are really belong together are sort of treated as if they were not. That's one of the features of thought that's going wrong. Now, there are a great many other things. You see, I think we've gone into this, that thought is not behaving rationally. You see, that they wouldn't do that. If thought, to be rational about it, you would say we must acknowledge the fact of our interdependence and behave accordingly. You know, but people don't seem to do it, you see. There's a thought, it seems to be very hard for people to think that way, generally speaking. I mean, some people may, but you know, it's very hard. See, it's been said, some people have come out with the idea of what they call the Gaia hypothesis, namely, the Earth is like a single organism. The whole of life on this planet, it makes a kind of organism which is very stable and which responds to protect itself, you know. And some people are very favorable to this hypothesis, saying if you believe it, then you would begin to put the Earth first. You see, it's like saying some cells of the body wouldn't put themselves first if they are part of the whole body. And of course they do sometimes. They're cancer cells. They grow first. They just keep on growing independent of the body, right? So you could say that this whole process, from the point of view of the Gaia hypothesis, what's going on is the proliferation of cancer all over the planet, right? Now, see, a few people take this hypothesis seriously, but you see, very few are really, as yet anyway, letting it change their whole approach, right? But maybe someday it will have an effect, you see. Now, you see, it's similar to a virus. You see, also a cancer, a virus. If you take a virus, it spreads. You see, there's a certain pattern of proteins in there, DNA, and when it enters your body, it sort of gives instructions to your body to make more of the same, right? Right? And then when you pass it on to somebody else, the same happens. It goes on and on. You see, so this information can be like a virus. We have a whole amount of thought, of knowledge, of information spreading all over the world. But the more computers and radio and television we have, the faster it spreads, right? And therefore, the virus of violence can spread, right? The virus of greed or the virus of fear. Or, in fact, you may have read in the papers, computers can be infected with similar viruses. That there's a bit of information which says spread this to another, the same pattern to another computer with instructions to spread it again and again. Right? It's very similar. So, you see, somehow this is a disease of thought, of knowledge, of information. Right? You see, you can see that is subject to a disease. And this has very serious consequences. These diseases can kill human beings or whole societies physically, or they can kill us. The diseases of knowledge and thought can kill us in another way, or even destroy the planet. Right, so, so if you go into that, you can see that somehow there's a wrong way of thinking that is behind these vast set of troubles. You see, it spreads. Each one excites the other. You see, one form of nationalism excites another. I have a friend in Israel, a professor of social geography, who pointed out that Jewish nationalism in the form of Zionism provoked Palestinian nationalism. In the beginning, there never was any. They never thought of themselves as a nation, right? But you see, one provoked the other and provoked the other back and back, right? And it was all thought, right? In other words, nationalism cannot be anything else but thought, saying we we belong to this nation, this territory is ours, right? Now it happens that both of these nations are saying this territory is ours. So what are they going to do? You see, they say we are different. Thought tells us we are different. We cannot get together. We have got to be separate. Thought also tells us this nation belongs to us. This land, right? It's the same thing. You say you have land and you say this is mine. Now, how in the world could it be mine? You see, if you look at land, there's nothing in the land which says it's mine, right? There was a famous Indian chief, Chief Seattle or something of that name, who wrote to the President of the United States of that time, a long time ago. And I was saying they wanted to make a treaty to buy land from the Indians, and he said, we cannot understand how anybody could own land. So you see, it's a way of thinking. These Indians did not think that way, but the people in Washington did, obviously. Now, the point is that the ownership of land is entirely in thought. Right? If you think you own it, you own it. You see it, provided everybody else will think the same way. If somebody else won't agree with you, then you've got to fight, right? So now, therefore, fights over land are entirely due to the way of thinking, right? You may say, man, this is the way it is, and we'd better stick to it, but when people were fairly separate and so on, and not too many of them, this might have worked up to a point. But now we're all interdependent, and it won't work, you see. So money also is thought, right? You see, originally they took gold, but gold doesn't have much value in itself. You can't eat gold or anything, but it was exchanged, right? Now, then gold was replaced by paper, which is even less valuable. And then paper is replaced by bank accounts, and bank accounts are now replaced by little electric currents in computers, another form of thought, right? So therefore, according to what the computer thinks, if the computer thinks you have a lot of money, then you're all right. So if it doesn't think that way, then you cannot get access to what you need, right? So you can see how pervasive this problem of thought is. Say this nation, that nation, we against them, one family against another, one race against another, one color against another. You see, it's thought which makes those problems very big, right? Now, you see, I think we were talking about last year, suppose you have a black man and somebody comes up and says, I don't like them, and of course, but the fact that he's black is not is picked out by thought, right? You see, he might, as he said, be a banker. Somebody who didn't like bankers would say, I don't like him because he's a banker, right? Or I don't like him because he's Jewish, or I don't like him because he's a communist, or whatever. You see, all of that is thought, right? In other words, people, according to how you think, your prejudice goes accordingly, right? Okay, so I think then that's a sort of a review that I'm saying that thought is behind these problems, and that people generally haven't thought that way. See, in the beginning, thought was considered to be, and it still is, a very valuable thing. Thought also has done all the things which we are proud of, you see. It has built our cities. It has, well, we shouldn't be too proud of them, I suppose. But it has created science and technology and all the things we see. Everything you see in this room, or in practically all of what is called nature here, has been arranged by thought, right? And agricultural and everything, you see. So everything we do has been arranged by thought, right? And it has been very creative, medicine and all sorts of achievements, right? And yet thought also goes wrong somehow, and it produces all this destruction. Now, in the past, people may not have noticed this and have thought only that thought is knowledge is power, ignorance is bad, and so on. But there's a certain danger in knowledge and in thought, which people haven't paid enough attention to. Right? And so okay, we have all this thought, and And it's somehow not going right, you see. Maybe it started to go wrong thousands or tens of thousands of years ago, we don't know. If you go back through history, as far as we know, it wasn't doing very well. I mean, there have been endless wars as far back as it goes. There has been slavery, exploitation, plunder, every manner of chaos, every manner of deception. If you go through the Bible, it was always there. If you go back in almost any history, it was always there. And perhaps if you go far enough back, it wasn't so bad because people didn't have the weapons to do much harm, right? But the more technology developed, the more dangerous it became. And now that technology has gone so far, it has become really deadly. It has really become impossible for us to imagine going on with it indefinitely. As I say, for 1,000 years, if you imagine 1,000 years of what's going on now, what will happen? Will there not be some catastrophe or other? Therefore, with the growth of technology, the human race is faced with a tremendous crisis or a challenge, right? That we have got to do something about this thought, right? We can't just let it go on destroying us. I mean, just if you've got a cancer growing in you, you say, well, at some stage I'd better do something about it. Now, a cancer starts to grow slowly, but at some stage it starts to grow very fast and spread. And you say the quicker you do something about it, the better. And that's really where we are, you see. Now, but then what do you do about it? You see, you can't cut out thought. I mean, we couldn't do without it, right? You can't just say, all the bad thoughts are going to be cut out, you see. You can't select them all and cut them out. And so we have to go into it more deeply. I say this is not an obvious thing, you see. It's very subtle. And it goes very deep, you see. Right? Now, we want to get to the root of it, right? To the base, to the source of it. You see, if you imagine a stream which is being polluted near the source, and then people downstream don't know about that, so they start removing bits of pollution, trying to purify their water, but perhaps introducing more pollution of another kind as they do so. And therefore, what we've got to do is to see this whole stream and get to the source of it. You see, somewhere at the source of thought, it is being polluted. That's the suggestion. It is being diverted in some way. It is going in the. It is, you say, taking a wrong turn, but it's taking a wrong turn all the time. You see. You could say in one sense, when they started pouring pollution in, that was the wrong step. But the fact they keep on pouring it in is the main point. It's pouring in all the time. So therefore, the source is not in time. Not to go back to ancient times when it may have started, but rather the source is always now. And that's what we have to look into, you see. Right, so that was more or less sort of a summary of some of the things we talked about last time, and in the beginning. And now we'll go on. I want to go on with trying to see how we're going to go about it, but perhaps people would like to discuss it a bit first.
I'm kind of intrigued. You're saying that thought is the root of all this, and how I see it is that it's a form of identification, of a person's identification with a limited grouping, such as in nationalism. If I identify myself as an American, as someone from the United States, immediately in my own consciousness I have also identified those things that are not American, that are un-American. And in so doing, I look at those qualities which are un-American with a jaundiced eye perhaps, or with some sort of contempt. Seems to be a phenomenon that as soon as anyone identifies with something conceptually, or color of skin, religion, whatever it may be, that there is also immediately created the opposite situation which is looked down upon.
Yes, that's true. Yes, but that's all thought. You see, to identify yourself is to say I'm the same as such and such. We're all the same, right? And they're all different.
Thought again, there to identify with the larger.
What?
We are using thought again to identify with the larger.
Yeah, or you can identify with the body. We see with the simplest identification, say I am the body,
Of course.
and then, or I am my appetites, or I am my money. I depend. I am my family, or whatever. And then you identify with something bigger. I am my country, my religion, or my God. I say I'm part of it, or I can say that's part of me, and I can't do without it, right? And that's me. So we're saying me is defined by thought, right? Now, is there a me which is not defined by thought? You say, I'm not asking, don't say yes or no. I'm saying that's the question, right? It looks as if a large part of what we call me is defined by thought, and mostly not even my own thought, but the thought of the whole society and the culture. I pick that up from other people, right? Now, some people pick up, there are a lot of ideas circulating around about how to identify yourself, and what we call subcultures, right? Some people identify with a certain subculture and some people with another one, and they come in conflict. Like saying there may be the drug culture, there may be another culture, I don't know. There's all sorts of subcultures. I mean, each national group inside this country, each forms a subculture, which tends to gradually merge with the larger one. And between them there are all sorts of conflicts, but it all comes from thought, right? From thinking. If you think that way, that's the way it is. See, so thought is very powerful.
Isn't this what science was? That was why science was developed, I think, is so that it's not true because I say it, or because I'll slug you if you say it isn't. It's you prove it, and it doesn't make any difference about all of these divisions. It's still true if you can prove it. Isn't this what science partly was trying to do?
Yes, not all thought is wrong. You see, there is thought which is correct, right? For example, here is a flower, and so on. Or I can make a map of this state and drive according to the map. If it's the right map, it gets me there. It directs me, and if it's a wrong map, I don't arrive where I'm supposed to, right? So there is thought which is correct and thought which is incorrect, but you see, we're having a great deal of thought which is incorrect, which is that we are separate from all these other parts of the world when in fact we're not. Now, usually you're ready to correct that. You see, if you're driving on the wrong road and you suddenly realize that, you see the road sign, you don't go ahead, but you say, okay, that's the wrong road, I must find the right road. But when people are driving on the wrong road here and saying, we're driving toward a collision course and to destroy the planet, that move to correct it is very sluggish, if at all, you see. And why? You see, we're seeing that when it comes to identification, what you were saying with the self or with your country or whatever, it seems that there's a move of thought not to be rational, not to see facts, not to acknowledge facts, right? And to be irrational. And say people will overlook, and if your country is doing something, especially during war, people don't want to see that it may be wrong, right? They say, you mustn't criticize this country while we're in trouble. See, if suppose you think the generals are not, doing it right, you mustn't say so, right? It's censorship. They say you will spoil our morale, right? So you see, so they're saying something else takes precedence over truth and fact, right? They're saying we have got to think in a certain way in order to get things going, right? In order to move, right? In order to act, in order to manage, right? You see, we can't manage. So saying I can't look at all that stuff because if I did, I wouldn't be able to manage my affairs, right? It would be too disturbing. See, so thoughts could be very disturbing, and then there's a move to not to allow attention to go there. Now that's one of the problems. That's self-deception, right? See, thought moves not toward being correct and factual, but it moves toward self-deception, toward illusion. Now that's dangerous, right? But we don't seem to see the danger. You see, in other words, that thought, when it's moving to self-deception, says it denies there's any danger and says there's no danger, right? Everything is all right. Don't worry. You see, I remember in one of the books I recently wrote, in the introduction, my friend and I referred to a crisis, and somebody who wrote a review said, "Where's the crisis?" I don't know what he was thinking, but perhaps he was thinking that, no, everybody around me looks perfectly all right, I'm making plenty of money, and so are they, and nothing to worry about. So you see, you keep your eye focused narrowly on some limited area and say, there's no problem there. And
maybe as well, in a very subtle way, he glimpses the real danger reading your book, and I think you wanted to cover it, maybe, maybe, because I think I read that review and it was really, for me, it was kind of disturbing my organism, and I said probably he has read the book, or maybe he just glimpsed in a very subtle way that here this book brings out something that can be really disturbing, so it's a danger for the self-deception.
yes, that may well be, and that's very likely, but you see, of course we don't know for sure, but but I'd say that don't want to focus on that one incident, but rather that's very general. And if that only happened once, we'd say, oh, that's not too bad. But it's happening all the time. That's what I'm trying to say.
But I think it's a good example because, for instance, I've done a lot of speaking on behalf of nuclear issues, and very often people of all different ages will respond by saying, "Well, what can I do about it?" I mean, it's bigger than, anything I can do about it. So I think the assumptions that we've discussed, the assumptions in thought, are, one of the things we need to look at. I think that in order to have the energy to look into this, some of these assumptions have got to be looked at.
Yes. Now, you see, if you say, this is too big for me, in one sense it's true, but in another sense I say it's not. Now, you see, if you say the crisis is only the external phenomenon, what's going on, then it's very big, right? It's like saying, suppose you have a dam, which has not been constructed properly and it slowly erodes away, then suddenly it goes, right? And all that wall of water is running down, you're not going to be able to stop it at that moment. But you see, the question is, what about that process which is constantly eroding, making the dam, wrong kind of dam and letting it erode? You see that deeper down, what's going on, that the real crisis is not in these events which are confronting us, like wars and crime, and drugs and economic chaos and pollution and all that. But it's really, what is the thought which is making it all the time? Now, you see, each person can do something about that thought because he's in it. You see, now one of the troubles we get into is to say it's them who is thinking all that and me who is thinking right. But I say that's a mistake, you see. You see, I think that thought pervades us, and the minute, it's like viruses, as soon as they enter you, they'll start to multiply unless there's an immune system that stops them. Right? So the kind of thought that's going on all around us begins to take over in every one of us, without even noticing it. And do we have a kind of immune system or something that stops it, you see? Now the only way to stop it is to recognize it, to acknowledge it, to see what it is. Now, therefore, if any one of us starts to look at that, then we are looking at the source of the problem. It's the same in all of us, huh? You see, we may imagine that the source of the problem is somebody over there is thinking these wrong thoughts, or a lot of people are. But the source of the problem is much deeper, that something is going wrong in the whole process of thought, which is socio-cultural, which belongs to all of us. that it's sort of spreading like a virus. And each one of us is nourishing that virus. Is that? So if you begin to see that, then you are beginning to do something about what's going wrong. Now, that doesn't guarantee that we're ever going to stop it, but it's the beginning. It's the only way you can hope to begin. You see the saying? If enough of us do it, then it will start to change.
What I seem to be hearing is like she was saying, the assumption, we have to get at some of these assumptions. The primary one being that of individuality, of being individual, separate.
Yes, well, we have that assumption. We must question it. You see, in some sense it's true, we are separate, but in another sense it isn't. With regard to thought, it is not true. Maybe physically it has some truth.
But thought maintains that assumption that we are individual.
Yes. So that is an assumption. We'd have to question that our thought is our own individual thought. Now, to some extent it is. We have some independence, but we must look at it. It's more subtle than to say it's individual or not individual. You see, we've got to see what thought really is without presuppositions. Now, see, if you say, I'm going to question whether it's individual, then we shouldn't jump to the opposite extreme and say it's not, it's collective, you see. But rather, we have got to see what thought really is. And whatever is going wrong, that's the first step to try to understand what is really going on. Now, what is really going on when we're thinking? Now, I'm trying to say that most of our thought, its general form, is not individual. It originates in the whole culture, and it pervades us. We pick it up as children from parents, from friends, from school, and from newspapers, books, and so on. We make a small change in it, and we select certain parts of it which we like, and we may reject other parts. But still, it all comes from that pool, right?
Well, that's right. It isn't just a question of well, I have switched from Democrat to Republican, or I have switched from socialism to capitalism, or any of these things, because they're all part of the problem, right?
Yeah. Yes, you see, it's not a question of the particular content of thought, but it has to do with what we may call the deeper structure of thought, which is common to all of us. It's like with atoms. You have an atomic structure that is common to all atoms of a certain kind. And you see, if you understand one of them, you understand something about all of them, right? See, so when people learned to disintegrate a few uranium atoms, that implied something for all of them. It opened the way to chain reactions and so on. Now, what I want to say is that this deep structure of thought, which is the source, this eternal, constant source, timeless, it's always there. It's not that we go back in time when it can, but it's constantly working, right? And this deep structure of thought is what we have to get at, and this is what is common, right? Now, but we'll have to come to this, that the content of thought and the deep structure are not really that separate, because the way we think about thought has an effect on its structure. For example, if we think that the thought is coming from me individually, this will affect how thought works. So we have to look at both content and structure, right? Now that's the sort of thing we're aiming for in this period of time and in this weekend. There's some things I would like to bring out about this content and structure. Right? To see what I'm saying, we want to get some insight into how it's all going. Without this insight, I say we are going to find it very hard to get to do anything. Right? We're sort of just caught in this whole whirlpool. And if some of us have this insight, it has a meaning or a significance or a value, even though only a few of us have it. Right? It's not right to think, well, we're just a few of us and there's this tremendous wave of destruction. That will make you very depressed, right? But unnecessarily so. I think we all get into it, but it is not really necessary to do that, right? Now, we can't tell whether the human race is going to get through this or not, you see. That's a fact, you see, but we can't tell it isn't going to get through either. So, see, some people faced with this uncertainty may want to be certain and just say, well, I'd rather believe it's not going to get through. I remove this uncertainty. But now, but the only thing you can say is that what I'm suggesting is this, that when we look at this, we are looking at the real source of the difficulty in ourselves or in this group or wherever. It is all one, right? So if we can see it here, we have seen the essence, right? Now, and that has significance, right?
A moment ago when you said have an insight into the thought, you weren't meaning simply to have an accurate description of the situation, but something more.
Yeah. It's to see its inner nature, to really see into it, right? Like you have an insight into a puzzle or whatever is a very simple, a small case of it, right? You see, I like to play with words, like the word evidence has the root videre, to see, right? Video. It means to see outwardly. The evidence is what you see outwardly. Now, if there were a corresponding English word which had the same Latin root, you would have the word invidence, to see inwardly, right? But the English word for that is insight. So from the evidence, you need an insight, or else you don't understand, right? The evidence alone won't get you anywhere. It's just the outside, right? But without the evidence, you also can't get anywhere. So we have to see the meaning of it. To see what it all means, right? Now that's a kind of inner perception. Now, this is an extraordinarily difficult kind of inner perception, or at least it looks that way. You see, suppose you're doing a scientific problem or a technical problem. You have a lot of evidence, certain facts and so on. You don't understand how the thing works, but as you work with it, suddenly you see how it all works, right? And we could call that a kind of insight, looking into it. But see, here we have got to see how thought works, and usually we use thought to look at things, to figure things out. Now, how are we going to do it now, you see? I'm just raising the question, right? But, I'm not going to answer it right away. You see that we are facing an extraordinary question, which is, it could be asked, say, what is the instrument with which you see how thought works?
Well, one of the things that I notice is that when one attempts to look at thought, one looks through time, thinking that one can achieve something through seeing certain parts of it. But more and more, that seems just to create more confusion. And that seems to be one of the processes of thought, to work through time.
Yes, well, thought does work through time. It takes time to think, and thought projects time as past and future, right? Mm-hmm. Now, well, I think I was going to say something about that a little further on, but
the instrument to see thought can't be thought itself.
Well, probably not, but you see, if it isn't thought, then what is it?
Isn't it possible
Perception.
just to watch?
Yeah, what? Yes, perception, but not only sense perception.
Well, it's a deeper inner thing that's not thought. It's insight, or it's of a different nature than thought.
Yes, it is a different nature than thought, and yet we need clear thinking to present this problem. You see, one of the things which is interfering with insight is just thought, right? The way thought works, that it works in such a way as to prevent insight. For example, if we have the assumption that thought is being produced by the self, by the thinker, then you experience it that way, and then in a way you're denying that thought is being, that you're denying what is actually happening and presenting another picture, you see. Now that makes it very hard to have an insight. You see that the thought contains a deceptive function, or it produces some illusory picture. And you see, so if you say, we have got to get the evidence, you see, and if we look inwardly, when we look inwardly at first, we will look at a picture which has been fabricated by thought. You see, and therefore we will have the wrong evidence. You see that we'll have the wrong starting point. Now, you see, that's what I'm trying to say. It's a very subtle thing which we have to go into slowly.
You mean that you might have to, if you had a so-called problem, that you would look at that and try to resolve it, and it may be created by the thinking itself, so it's the wrong premise to start from.
Yes, you see, the thinking creates things which don't seem to be thought. Now you see, if I say that the sense of self has been created by thought, but that's not the way we experience it, right? So when you just look inwardly, you feel, I am here thinking. Now, you see, it's no use trying to deny the evidence of your perception, or at least you seem to perceive it that way, you see. That seems to be the phenomenon. Now, you can't begin by denying the phenomenon and saying it's something else, you see, because now the phenomenon is produced to a large extent by thought, but thought doesn't know it's doing it. That's the point we're coming to. Now, that's one of the themes which I want to develop here, that a great many things are happening which are being done by thought, but thought doesn't know they're being done by thought and treats them as the actual fact from which it is proceeding, right? And therefore, it becomes hard to get the evidence on which the insight has to be, which will help lead to the insight, you see. That is, see, one of the points about evidence is that one reason we're looking at this is we may have noticed that things are not working right. You see, the evidence is that there's a lot of confusion and contradiction in thought all over the world. It's producing all the troubles that I've been describing. Now, but we're in a very treacherous domain, because a lot of this evidence is still infected by the thought process. It's being interpreted through the very thought process which we are questioning. Now, see, also, I'm not trying to say that thought is all wrong, but rather a certain kind of thought is where the trouble is, and there's another kind that may be right, and we have to discuss what their relationship might be. Now, see, if you say, now thought is based on memory, clearly, well, I'll come. You see, well, let me come to this a little later. You see, thought contains a tremendous tendency to distortion and self-deception, which we have got to begin looking at. Now, some of it has been called, say, wishful thinking, as I've described it, right? Thing. Now, what is behind this? You see, one point we could begin with is that there's a certain relationship between emotion and thought which is not working right. You see, one of the assumptions of thought is that thought is one thing and feeling is another, right? And that now, I think the evidence is that they're not different. Now that suggests that. Now, I mean, you can immediately see that when you think, it affects your feelings, and vice versa, the feelings affect the thought. That is, certain emotions may produce a tendency for you to, if you have a desire for to believe a certain thing, your thought will always move in the direction to confirm that belief, right? Mm-hmm. You see, now, and that's going on all the time. I mean, for example, if people want to believe that everything is all right in the way we're saying there's no crisis, then there's obviously a desire to believe there's no crisis. And therefore, people will constantly fabricate evidence that there is no crisis by their ways of thinking. Or if they want to believe there's a crisis, they're liable to fabricate evidence that there is a crisis, you see. It's really difficult. See, some people say, great, there's a crisis. This gives us a chance to make a revolution, right? Now, this whole process is very treacherous, that the emotions profoundly affect what happens with thought and tend to make it false, and thought can affect the emotions. According to what you think, you will get feelings. You see, if you think something is wonderful, you get a certain feeling. If you think it's terrible, you get another one, and so on. You see, you can say this situation is depressing, and you would get a depressing feeling, and so on. Right? You see that it's clear just by ordinary experience that thought and feeling have a tremendous effect on each other, which denies the way that our culture is thinking about it, generally speaking. Now, also neuroscience would back that up. You see, the studies of the brain structure suggest that the thought probably originates somewhere in the outer cortex of the brain, the frontal lobes, and the emotional center is deeper down, and there's a very thick bundle of nerves connecting them. And they should be closely related, you see, by that in the nerves. And in fact, there's a lot of evidence they are. The well-known example I discussed last time of a man in the last century who, in an explosion, an iron pin was driven through his brain, went out, and just cut that bundle of nerves. And he was totally changed in character. You see, he had been a very level-headed, reliable person. And he became totally emotionally unstable, and also unable to follow a connected line of thought. And he was unable to really do anything. It's clear that there is a close connection between emotion and thought, two-way. And we can see that we discussed last year that this connection may be disturbed even though we don't cut that bundle of nerves, right? People are talking a lot about stress, which is such a disturbance that we may have the emotions in the primitive sense, or have the reflex of, say, to fight, to run, or to freeze, to produce the neurochemicals needed to make you fight, or to run, or to frighten you, or to stir you up with adrenaline, noradrenaline, all sorts of things, or to calm you down with endorphins or whatever. And now, if somebody is in a situation, this situation which was on the television program of an airport controller, he's angry at his boss, you see. His boss is mistreating him. So he can't run because he's got to stay there. He can't fight his boss, and he can't just stop and freeze and do nothing. So meanwhile, the brain is pouring neurochemicals into the system, as if he were in the jungle, you see. And this is stirring up the body and making it all work rather badly, and also preventing thought, you see, because thought requires a nice quiet brain, not being stirred up like this. It can't be rational when it's all that stirred up. So the more he thinks, then the worse it gets. He'll get thoughts which lead him further astray and make more trouble. And it builds up, you see. Now, civilization tends to make this worse. I mean, that's clear. In very simple times, and with hunter-gatherer tribes of 20 to 40 people, everybody knew each other. They had a very simple life, and such situations are seldom sustained. The more civilization develops, you have to have a bigger society with rules, authority, police, jails, armies. You have wars and jealousy and hatred and plunder. Whoever's running the show, somebody else wants to run it, and so on. And you build up a tremendous amount of stress. And the further civilization goes, by and large, the greater the stress, you see. At least it appears that way, that it has been, and we haven't solved the problem of what to do about it. Now, so there's this relation of emotion and thinking, and now I want to suggest that it goes wrong, you see, because of this process we've been talking about. Now let's take the word thought. We roughly know what it means by our experience, right? You can say, I'm thinking, I know it, or I may not know it. But then the word thought is interesting. It's the past participle of the verb to think. It really means what has been thought, right? In other words, you think something, and then it becomes thought. You see, now we have our culture, most cultures say that after you think something, it just vanishes. but it doesn't vanish, it becomes thought. Whatever you have been thinking becomes thought. If I've been thinking people of this race are inferior, it becomes my thought, right? Then that reacts automatically, right? The next time I see him, and I see that person as inferior without having to think, right? I'm not conscious of thinking anymore. Or if I say that there are assailants in the neighborhood and I'm in a dark night and I see sort of a shadowy form, my thought is, there are assailants here, and I may then perceive that assailant, right? The thought just works, even though there may be none, right? And if I see it's a shadow, it all goes. Now, the adrenaline, while it's there, the adrenaline is going, the heart's beating and everything, the whole system. So I say thought, emotion, the body, everything is all one process, right? It seems evident. Although our whole culture uses words and language and thought in such a way as to say that it's not so, right? Now, and that's one of the misleading things going. One of the ways in which the wrong notion that thought has about itself is twisting up thought. You see, now, so we have this thought, which is now thought. Therefore, is clearly coming from memory, right? I've been thinking something. I know something. You see, I build up knowledge through experience, through practice. I think about it, I organize it, it goes into me and it becomes knowledge, it's thought, right? Part of my knowledge is skill by practice. It's still kind of memory, right? In the body or in the brain somewhere. It's all part of one system, right? And I also have skill in thinking. But the more I think, and the more I am able to get skill in thinking, right? So, therefore, there's what Polanyi has called tacit knowledge, the knowledge which is sort of, you can't state in words, but it's there, right? Like saying you know how to ride a bicycle and you can't state what that is, right? So you could imagine somebody trying to formulate. You see, when you turn a bicycle, see if the bicycle is falling, you have to turn it in the direction which it falls, right? To make it come up. Now, mathematically, you can prove that there's a formula that the angle at which you turn it is, I forget, is related in a certain way to the angle at which you're falling, right? So this is what you will do, right? But you don't work out the formula, right? You see, your whole body does countless movements which you can't describe, and it all makes it work, right? But that's tacit knowledge. It's a kind of knowledge you've got, without which you could do nothing, right? As abstract knowledge would be of no use without that. Now, so we have all that as knowledge. It's somehow stored up from the past. It's a continuation from the past of something that you learned. Huh? Now, then let's come. So we have now experience, knowledge, thought, and practice, and so on. All one process. Now, then in there is emotion somehow, feeling. You see, now the word feeling, thinking has the word an ending ing, which suggests something more active, thought something from the past, right? The word feeling would suggest something that's always from the present, right? Now, but many of our feelings obviously are not from the present. You can call them up, right? Remember them, and also you're affected by past feelings, that if you have had a traumatic experience, that feeling can come right up again when something similar happens. And so, in fact, the feelings are often conglomerates of past feelings. You see, all merged into some big, generalized feeling. Right? Now, the language doesn't do justice to that. Now, for example, suppose we were to coin a new word. I know people won't accept this generally, but we could, for our own purposes, coin a new word, and you could use it for your own purpose without trying to get it, even though it is not part of our common practice, a common use of language. But you bring in the word felt. You see, just as we have thoughts, we have felts, right? Now, therefore, we could say there may be such a thing as new feelings, which tell you of something new, or which, say, subtle feelings you would have with nature, or say you suddenly see a dangerous animal in front of you and you feel something. But most of our feelings are not of that nature. They are felts, right? As most of our thinking is not fresh and new, but it's thought. Now, we say these may have their place. You see, you should be warned of danger if there's danger. You see, for example, you may have electric wires. Now, there's no instinct that tells you that electric wires are dangerous. But you may be told that they're dangerous, you see, and you may see the reason you must keep away from high voltage electric wires. And seeing high voltage electric wire, you get a feeling, you felt really, you move back, right? So that is useful. But on the other hand, we get all sorts of other felts, like saying if somebody treats me badly and doesn't have due regard for me, then I may feel angry, right? Or I feel violent or hatred, even going on to hatred. Or certain things may give pleasure, right? Because they gave it in the past, right? And so on. Or pain, or fear, or whatever. Now, but still, we're inclined to say that's feeling and it's not felt, right? It's really very important. If it were feeling, it would be probably very important, right? If it's a felt, it may not be very important. You see, but that leads us to give too much importance to felts. But that has a profound effect on everything. Now, you see, thought and felt are one process. They are not two. They both come from the memory, right? In the memory, they probably are all mixed, right? You can't imagine there's one memory for thoughts, another one for felts. Saying two boxes. But they're all there in one memory. So, okay, so something happens, that memory stirs up, right? Suddenly produces thought and felt. The felt may be me who has been insulted, hurt. The thought is, he had no reason to treat me that way, and so on, right? It's terrible and whatnot, right? They sustain each other. So this is a wrong idea about thoughts and about the whole process, which our culture and most cultures have propagated, which helps to make that add to the chaos and confusion in that process. You see, because when we get angry or when we get pleasure or pain, we give it too much importance. Now that leads us to more trouble and more false thoughts. You see, if a thought produces a very disturbing felt, then comes a reaction to try to. The body says, or the brain sort of sends out signals and meaning lest it will get rid of the disturbance. And the whole process then searches the memory for a thought which will produce nicer felts, less disturbing, right? But they may turn out to be wrong thoughts. They will lead you astray, right? And they'll produce more pain rather than less pain. You see, for example, this could even go as far as national or international relations, right? That people want politicians to tell them things that produce nice states of felt, right? And they're likely to vote for those politicians, right? I think that we may have seen a number of examples of this. Now, but of course, this doesn't mean that you have elected the best politician. He may make you feel better, but then some of the things he does may make you feel a lot worse there. So all through life, you see, we get into that trouble, right? Wishful thinking and so on. You see, all around, that's a very serious problem, right? That the thoughts and the felts come up. They're coming up from memory. Now, the thoughts and the felts generally are not harmoniously related, and they're disturbing the system. Now, if you imagine somehow there's a true relationship possible on that thick bundle of nerves between the two centers, intellectual and emotional, but that bundle of nerves cannot touch the real source of the disturbance, which is memory. I mean, who knows where memory is, right? You see, all the moves which are made, which instinct makes to correct the disturbance, are irrelevant and probably make it worse. Is that clear? You see that this sort of thing can happen even in the body. You see, I remember I once had fibrositis due to pressure on the nerve in the spine. It was the nerve coming from the hand, so it produced a tremendous pain from the hand, apparently, though the trouble was not here in the arm at all. It was in the pressure in the spine, right? But in other words, any signals coming from the hand would go through that nerve and reach the brain and be interpreted as from the hand. But if you touch that nerve halfway between the hand and the brain, it will produce a similar effect, right? Now, the point is that not only confused one intellectually by saying, I think the pain is coming from the hand, but it confused the whole body because the hand inflamed, as if, in other words, all the processes of the body were misinformed, right? You see? So, therefore, if we get a wrong notion of where the trouble is coming from, the very move to correct it makes it worse. Now, that's what's happening. You see, we might think that suppose we say our thoughts, we have a disturbance, and the thought says, oh, I have a wrong feeling. I'd like to have a good one. And the feeling said, that thought is horrible, I'd like to get rid of it, you see. I mean, so the feeling makes a demand to produce a nicer thought, and the thought makes some demand to produce a nicer feeling. But you see, they're not really, the demand only goes to memory. You see, anything which happens in the real relations will only muddle it up more. But the demand actually finally has to go to memory, which is the source of the problem, right? But it doesn't know that that's the source of the problem, so it doesn't go there. See, memory constantly stirs up to try to solve this problem, which it is producing. And the more it tries to solve it, the more it produces it. See, so some funny thing is going on there, see, which is disrupting the system. This thought-felt process. It's really all one process. We have to watch out for this language, which even, see, the fact that we have the word thought and no word for felt helps to make it a little worse. Although even if we have the right language, it doesn't make it right, you see. I'm just saying it's useful to have this change of words just to call attention, but changing the words alone is obviously not enough. Now, okay, so is that clear then? That you see, if you can see yourself now, that we've got this process of thought felt, right? You can see it going on everywhere.
Maybe I'm jumping here. If I am, I withdraw it. But we actually remember in sort of 5 cents video, and then we have words for it over here, and then we have the cultural conditioning over here, and the shoulds and the shouldn'ts over here, and of course all this gets together and it does make a mess. Am I on track?
Yes, it's all in memory, you see.
Yeah.
It's all muddled, mixed up in memory, but it comes out apparently separate. Now, therefore, when we think of it, we think they're all separate. So when we see a problem, we treat every bit as separate, but that will, every time we try to change one bit we think is wrong, we're changing the whole thing and making trouble on all the other parts. Do you see? See, if you try to make a better feeling, saying I shouldn't feel angry, you see, but you don't notice that the thought process, that the angry feeling is already muddling up your thought. It's there already, you see. It's saying I identify myself with my thought at that moment, right? And I say, I, the thinker, have decided that I shouldn't be angry. It's going to be very harmful to my interests. But I am already angry, right? The chemicals are already there and so on. And therefore, my thought is not very clear, right? So I probably make a very muddled way of trying to stop being angry. In fact, I may get angrier, you see. Or if I'm saying, you shouldn't be angry, you see, it'll probably make you angrier. I'm saying, look here, you shouldn't be angry, you know, because it's disturbing your self-interest. But I probably will not have the desired thing. You see, so thought is unable to handle that, right? But on the other hand, you can't say, my feeling says, I would like thoughts which are nicer. You see, the reason I'm angry is I remain angry is I have the thought that you have done me harm, right? You have done me wrong. And so, but you see, the point is that you can't just say, well, let's give up that thought, right? You know, the feeling might say, I would like a nicer thought. So it might even suppress the anger, you see, though it would still be there underneath, right? It would suppress consciousness of anger, right? Saying, I'd rather not think of that. Huh? Right? Saying, I'm not angry, it's all right. But it's still there, simmering.
Isn't that what affirmations are doing?
What?
Isn't that what affirmations are doing, overriding the disturbing thought?
Apparently overriding.
Apparently overriding.
Yeah. But in fact, you can't override it because, you see, the disturbing thought is in memory, and it's in the same memory that the affirmation is coming from. Huh?
Earlier you said we didn't know where memory was.
Yeah.
And I would like to suggest that it's in the connections, in the hookups, the wiring.
It may be. But people have argued about that. I don't think they have really settled it. Now, it doesn't matter where it comes from as far as our present argument is concerned, right? We can discuss it now without knowing where it comes from, right? Now, it would be interesting if somebody would find out. No, the point is now that that memory also affects the physical body, you see. It affects the sensations. You can remember them, and you can produce states of stress in the body from memory of states of stress, right? In fact, some people say you could even produce allergies that way and so on. I can't remember, there seems some evidence of producing allergies in animals that way. But from memories. So maybe it could even affect the allergy, whatever produces allergies and the immune system and all that. Right? See, it might have a really profound effect that what is in the memory could affect the whole system very, very deeply. That it's all mixed up together in the memory. So therefore, when memory works, you cannot separate the intellectual function, the emotional function, the chemical function, the muscular function. They're all there, you see, because this tacit knowledge is also a kind of memory. and that's really something very important that our culture gives us a wrong lead on, direction. That it constantly tends to imply that they could be separated and that one could control the other, you see. Saying, for example, that thought could control feeling or felt, or that otherwise feelings should be able to control thoughts. Like people are saying, love one another, and then you will have the right thoughts. And if you did, you would. But then, see, if you have already a lot of thoughts saying these people have done terrible harm to me, they've killed all my friends, they've tortured, they've murdered, and so on. They're all stirred up chemically. You'll find it very hard to love them. You see. Maybe one or two people might manage it, but in general it doesn't seem to work. Now, so you can see that you cannot, all of these approaches which start out from the assumption that these functions are really separate or separable cannot work. I mean, they're based on a wrong assumption.
So you're saying really that thought can't move without a felt.
Yeah, and felts can't move without a thought. Whatever's in the memory, everything stirs up. You see, imagine a pool with all sorts of stuff in it, Whatever you touch, the whole pool is stirred up, right?
The real surprise that thought comes from the memory at this moment, I could never conceive. And the felt comes as well as from the moment, from the memory. Because the feeling is something fresh, it takes place now. But the thought can be from the past.
Yes, well, the felt takes place now, but its source is memory, whereas if there were a fresh feeling, it would come from some other source, right? Perception, perhaps, I don't know, you see. It may be that our primary perception is through the feeling, which then gets refined through the thought, right? Thinking. But at least there's a sensitivity which would be the primary perception, and it gets more and more abstracted and refined into thought. Now, that's the one picture you could make. But now, see, let's say, for the sake of discussion, that you see something very beautiful in nature suddenly, and some response occurs first in feeling, and then you may begin to think about it. But that feeling may well be a fresh feeling, though it may not, right? Maybe you've seen something similar before and you haven't felt, right?
Yeah.
But it seems very difficult to recall that to the surface reproduce feeling In other words, the feeling as it moves into thought seems to merge into thought, and then when memory tries to bring the feeling to the surface, it doesn't seem to be able to do that.
Well, you can bring feelings up, but they're not necessarily the same as the original.
Right.
You see, you can bring up how you think it felt.
Yeah, because the original feeling seems to have merged into thought as thought went into memory.
Well, you see, what I suggest happened is simpler than that. It's that both went into memory,
Yes.
and memory is not the same thing as the original. It's some sort of rough copy.
Yeah.
It's you see, so.
But through some sort of thinking process, you can rethink, but you don't seem to be able to re-feel.
Well, you can. You can call up the feeling of what people do. Call up the feeling of what it was like to be a child, or sometimes something may remind you of it. Sometimes, and people get those feelings of the past, feelings of nostalgia, feelings of heaviness, oppression, or feelings of enjoyment, or. In other words, if you remember, the older you get, the harder it is, but if you can remember something that happened which had a strong feeling, some of that feeling comes back.
The vague,
Vaguely.
in a vague sort of
That's
way.
what I call a felt. But I say that is a minor point. The major point is that the felt is there ready to respond to the present moment. Say somebody that says something that offends you and you get a response of anger, which is a felt, or you may get fear. If you have been frightened badly by certain kinds of situations and something reminds you of it or something similar, will produce a feeling of fear, right?
But memory doesn't separate it.
No, it doesn't, but you get that fear which is combined with the thought, this is what made me afraid, or this is what's frightening. You never can separate them, you see. Now, but on the other hand, our language always separates them. We're always trying to separate them, and we're being misled, right?
Words are not natural to this. They have to be built in. Doesn't that confuse the thing because we don't use words the same way?
Well, yes, well, we have to learn. See, there's confusion of words and also confusion of the thoughts and the felts.
That's what I'm getting at.
They're all together, you see. Now, improving the words may help us to look at it. That's all I'm saying.
Well, that words are not, they're not natural to, in other words, the rest of it, the memory and the felt and all this is all in one piece. Well, then we build words in so that they are added to it. Is this the idea?
Yeah, but then they're also one piece. You see, the word is in the memory too. Whatever is in the memory is all one piece. That's what I'm suggesting, but we divide it up artificially.
Well, with an attached felt very often.
Yes, but they're not. But they're all together. They're all mixed together. You see, what you pour into this pool is all sort of mixed up, right?
Okay.
The word is part of what's poured into the pool.
Would there be any feeling on the emotional level if there weren't felts to precede it? Is it like thinking, the activity of thinking and thought being necessary? Thoughts being necessary for the activity of thinking to occur, felts being necessary for the activity of feeling emotionally to
That's
occur?
an interesting question. I think that usually we have some combination, you see, but whether there's a pure feeling, maybe there could be, but we say they may be mixed, or maybe these are just two extremes that we have described.
Make a distinction between emotional feeling and tactile type of, hot, cold, sensory.
Yeah, well, you see they're somewhat different in function because, you see, the emotional center will produce feelings which are starting in the brain somewhere, right? And rather than as sensations. They can produce the feelings of anger and pleasure and pain and, arousal and comfort and security. And all sorts of feelings or felts. You see, if somebody says something comforting, say you're worried, right? You may stir up the nervous system in some way by that thought. Now, if somebody says something comforting, then you feel better. Perhaps it liberates endorphins, you see, or something. You see that, or some other chemical that coats the pain centers or the centers which are producing the disturbance, right? So you could say that words and thoughts and so on can now stir up comforting feelings from the felt, from the pool of felts, right?
go past that and stir up feelings of discomfort because you feel that it perhaps wouldn't last. I mean,
Yes.
in other words, it can go on and on. It's just like saying, don't think of the color of your car. The
Yeah.
first thing you do is think of the color of your car. But it's like everything is connected in some way.
Mhm. Yes, that's true. You see, it also stirs up feelings of discomfort. You see, that's all in the memory. So certain thought may stir up a very uncomfortable feeling, a feeling of disturbance, right?
Both. Yeah, both
Both.
comfort and
Yeah,
discomfort.
they may be together. You see, and sometimes they are together, and then, you see, it's well known, you see, that if you have a mixture of pleasure and pain sensations, that, see, as the pain dies away, then you have an excess of pleasure, like you stub your toe and feel pleasure later. Or as the pleasure dies away, there's a feeling of pain, right? Or felt of pain.
Is that all there is? Or
Well, no. No, I'm saying this is I don't hope it's not all there is, but I'm saying that this is a big part of what's going on, you see. That's what I'm trying to say. And if you watch what's going on in all these problems that I told you, I was discussing, you see, like all the international problems. See, we have people producing pollution, you see, and they're arguing that pollution is not serious, right? Other people who are suffering the pollution are arguing that it is serious. Now, the people who are producing the pollution get felts that they're exaggerating. They're saying they get comforting felts when they say it's not serious. You see, and therefore they think that way, right? And then the brain demands comfort, and therefore it demands you keep on with those thoughts, right? Now, I say a lot of that's going on. It's very mechanical, you see. But we don't notice it's mechanical, and in fact the whole society says it's not mechanical. You see, now it doesn't mean everything is mechanical. Yeah.
What is the origin of the word thought, David?
Oh, I don't remember. It's not clear what its origin is. It may have this. I can't remember anyway. I think, you see. It may have to do with the same root as thing, you see, but I don't know.
That's our problem. Is there a process or an observation outside that problem, which is ourself, which is what you just described, which can do something about that problem?
Yes, or perhaps we already have. You see, let's make it more general, you see, because even to postulate that there is something outside may be something invented by this process itself. You see, there may not be.
Something new.
Yeah, is there something new or something more which enable us to get on with it, right? To get out of it. You see, that's
perception or insight.
It can be that, but you see, I say that's a suggestion, but I think that we have to be careful that that this thought-felt process can produce in the imagination something which it calls perception or insight too, you see. That is, whatever you say anything is, it can always be imagined, and you can mistake the imagined thing for the thing. You see, that the creation of illusion. Now, you see, that's why we have to go very carefully. It's a subtle question that if I say perception, that is a word, that goes into this pool of words and thoughts and felts, and out of it comes a picture of perception. And I say, yes, I perceive, right? You see, that's the danger. You see what I'm driving at? You see that you can say, love one another, that's what we need, right? All you need is love, right? And you say, so these words go into the pool and they come out with some felt and say, okay, I've got love, and now everything is all right. You see, those felts are whatever, past conglomerations of feelings are now given the name love, right?
But how could something new come out of what's the old?
Yeah, but yes, I'm not saying it's not all that, you see. I'm saying we have not said it's all that. I'm saying we don't know. There is more, but we're saying this has been a big thing. We have to pay some attention to it. You see, let's try to put it that as long as this is filling the brain so much, it will be very hard, assuming there is perception, for anything to be perceived. You see, it's like saying we fill the air with fog, and it will be very hard to see anything, right? Or you see, it's dust clouds or something. You see, you say, this is going on, or
does that mean that every part of the brain is touched by this cloud?
it may or may not be. You see, for the moment, we'll say that this is the dominant thing that's going on, generally speaking. You see, the less we make assumptions about it, I think, the better. You see, that if we can feel out what's going on, it's better than to make an assumption. And we will make some, perhaps, but still, let's try to be careful.
Well, presumably, if that's what's going on all the time, which is
almost all the time, let's put it that way.
almost
Much
all
of
the
the time.
time. I mean, it's perfectly obvious that that is what's happening most of the time. Then perhaps the only way one can approach it is just not to take it so seriously.
Well, that's one thing. That's the first step, which we've seen. That it's already implied in what we've said that if these are felt, that they're not to be taken so seriously as we had been doing. Mm-hmm. Now, that was a correct implication. See, the thought process is not all corrupt because, see, if it had been, we would never have produced this technology. We would never have got to the moon. You see, we would never have got to the next corner even. You see, that in other words, in order for this rocket to get to the moon and do all these things, people had to figure out all sorts of things and correctly. When they made a little mistake in a ring, the whole thing blew up, right? You see, so and that mistake was made because of the thought-felt process that there was a lot of some group of people didn't want these rings criticized for various reasons, and so they felt better not criticizing, and therefore, and so on. You see. So it was, although even technically this thought-felt process goes in there, but still it seems that thought has some possibility of not being totally wrong and not being totally muddled up in this thing. So we can see that seems clear enough, right? That thought can do all these other things and it can also get lost in this stuff, right? And maybe the two mix up. Yeah, 5 minutes. Yes, well, yes, I wanted to do one more thing, you see, maybe if we go on about, yeah, maybe 5 or 10 minutes beyond that. And then one point more which we could do tonight, you should discuss tonight. Now, this is the question of it was brought up before, how time comes into this, right? Because thought obviously is used for defining time, right? That is, no, you can't really define time without thought in some way. And now, you see, suppose we say, here we have this problem. It's all, we all see it. Now, in technical thought, which we say is that area where thought seems to work, we have a certain procedure, which is we want to solve a problem. You see, we say we have a certain thing, we want to achieve an end. And the material at hand is used as a means to the end, right? Which takes time. We have a plan and project. It all can work if we do it right. So human beings have developed that technical thought more and more, and it seems natural they would apply it to this problem too, you see. We would say, okay, here we see what's going on, thought, felt, it's clearly not right. So let's see what can we do. What we can do is, we must find, the end is to get rid of it. We must find the means and work on it and get rid of it. It will take time, right? You see, in time. As you remember in the Mikado, in the execution, my object all sublime I shall achieve in time, right? So the point is, that seems the most obvious way of trying to go about it. And in fact, it's implicit in many of the questions, right? That we have been raising. So, now, but on the other hand, you can see this can't work. You see, suppose we say I'm projecting this thought of making things better, but the felts are all still working there right now from the very moment in which I started to work on it, right? So they're all going wrong. Everything is going wrong. Or if I try to change the thoughts and get the right feeling, but the thoughts which I want to change are affecting the felts, right? So therefore, it is not possible to do this in time. We say there is no time in which to do it, right? You see, that's where the problem is. You see, ordinarily, for all technical problems, we have time. We project the end and use the means and achieve the end, right? And it seems natural, you see, it spills over into this area, right? that kind of approach. But it doesn't work. Now our culture doesn't realize it doesn't work, and we're constantly doing it. I mean, people are constantly trying to solve this problem by the kind of thought which projects an end and uses means. That's clear. Countless techniques exist for trying to solve this problem. Yes, now, see, so now you can see that we have to hold back. It's much deeper than we thought. Is that something? No, it's still going. Time is not the way, you see. But we don't know any other way. You see, so where are we, you see? We're saying all the way we had is not going to work, you see. It cannot work through time. But the whole of society, all of science, everything works through time, right? All our knowledge works through time. It does work nicely in certain areas. But I suggested it can't work here. Now, it's not clear exactly where the boundary is because a certain amount of memory, and obviously memory and time are here are almost the same thing, right? We cannot use memory as the base. At least it looks that way. Maybe we can, maybe we can't, but at least we see a problem in trying to do it. Now, well, yes, so and therefore it seems that whatever we do, this thought is spilling over. We try to become better in ourselves, right? We try to control our wrong tendencies. You know, everything that the society has taught us, right? But I say fundamentally it may work apparently up to a point, but underneath it won't work in the long run. I say it hasn't worked, you see. So people have tried to control their tendency to murder and to nationalism and to deception and to all these things, and no matter how long civilization has gone on, it has never stopped, right? This control didn't work, right? All the attempts to control it by laws and by moral precepts and by this and by that, it hasn't worked by and large. I mean, for some people it worked to a point, but it's not making the whole thing work. Now, so you see, thought is spilling over from the area of technical area where it is able to work, this kind of thought anyway, into an area where it doesn't work, partly because we don't know anything else apparently, but we really don't quite see why it spills over. You see, we say, why shouldn't we just stop? You see, maybe if we stopped trying to deal with this thing, the problem might not be there. You see, the problem itself is sustained by this attempt to control it, you see, because the thought which tries to control it is already twisted by the felts which it wants to, which are in the background there, which it's got to control.